welcome to our fourth Women in the Law podcast that ties in with our 13th annual Women in the Law conference, which takes place this year on May 21st, 2021. Women in the Law is designed to both inspire women attorneys and also to offer practical tips and advice on how to further one's career. It is my pleasure today to interview Joan Fortin, class of 1996, who is CEO of Bernstein Shur, Maine's largest law firm, and she is the first female CEO of this firm. Joan is also chair of Bernstein Shur's board of directors. I've known her for several years now. She's helped me out with reunions and spoken at multiple Women in the Law conferences. It's my pleasure today to discuss leadership with Joan and the core concepts of leadership together. Joan, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here.
I'm happy to have you. I'm going to give a little bit of background about your biography and share a little bit of that with our listeners and viewers. As I mentioned, she's chair of the board of directors. Her areas of practice have included environmental, land use, property tax, and valuation. She's in charge of the firm's recruiting, retention, and diversity initiatives. In 2018, Joan earned a Woman to Watch award, recognizing her as a champion for diversity and inclusion in the legal industry. A couple of fun facts that I loved on your website that how Bernstein Shur kind of presents your biography is that in her former life, is how they put it on the website, Joan was a law clerk for the Maine Supreme Judicial Court, a summer associate at Bernstein Shur, an attorney at a litigation firm in Alaska, focusing on telecommunications regulation, and part of student services at Bowdoin College. So I'm assuming you went to Bowdoin. I think I knew that.
I did not.
Oh, you did
I did not. I went to the competition. I went to Colby.
Okay. And that was your first, was that your first job?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Wow. So you were able to bring the Colby experience to Bowdoin. And my first question, this is a great segue, is tell me a little bit about your college experiences. Did you hold leadership roles? What did you find out about who you are and what things you enjoyed and what you didn't?
Oh, wow. College, that's such a long time ago. Well, I will tell you, I had a bumpy transition to college. I grew up in a dairy farm in rural Maine. I was first generation college. I went to Colby, which was only 15 minutes away, but culturally it was very, very, very far from anything I knew. And so I would say I had sort of a rough adjustment those first couple of years, and then I really kind of found myself and found my way through student services. So
wonderful.
At Colby, they have undergraduate head residents. So we have resident assistants in each dorm and then an undergrad in charge of each residence hall. And those were typically seniors, but they would select juniors, a couple of juniors each year. And so I was a head resident as a junior and a senior. And that's where I really kind of found myself. I found my people. I found my path forward. The trainings for that job in the fall, we used to go on a retreat and did, the outdoor trust building exercises, which I loved. And then also,
trust falls and those kinds of things. Yes,
exactly. The high ropes course.
Oh, yeah.
But that was also my introduction. You mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was my introduction. We used to just call it diversity back then. This was so long ago. We used to talk about tolerating diversity. That was a long time ago. We've come a long ways.
And I do have several questions for you later on diversity and inclusion. We will tap into that for sure. I've seen pictures of your dairy farm, and it's beautiful. And I bet you learned leadership skills on the dairy farm as well.
Yes, leadership, work ethic, communication, teamwork. We learned a lot of lessons on the farm. It was a really wonderful way to grow up.
And it's fantastic that you're first generation. I am always really, happy to hear those stories, and that, families and the next generation get to do maybe a little bit more than the generation that came before them. Do you have siblings? Did they?
I do. I'm one of 5, and 4 of us have a college degree, and 2 of us have advanced degrees, and 2 of us went to Colby, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. A nice Colby link.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about college. I asked you one of the other questions, and I threw in a few, is what did you enjoy about Colby, and maybe what didn't you?
Well, interestingly, I just touched on probably what I most enjoyed and what I didn't.
Okay.
That first year was tough. Socially, there were, some tough stuff happened unrelated to Colby. A lot of people have a tough adjustment to college.
Right.
So the beginning was a little hard, and then what I loved, once I found my people and my way, I loved it. And I look back now, I'm actually, talk about coming full circle. Last year I joined the Colby Board of Visitors, so I'm involved with Colby now, and I have for years said if I could go back and do Colby again, the professors and the academic environment, and Colby has so much to offer. And I certainly did get a lot out of Colby, but I wish I could go back and do it all over again now. But, it was great.
I feel like we all think that because we get so much more out of it when we're older, probably.
Yes,
but
I do think a lot of people. Yeah, I think that's right. And Colby, I went to Bowdoin, not straight out of Colby. I went to grad school, and that career path came out of Colby. So I was a head resident and did a Colby has a JAN plan. I did a JAN plan with a Colby resident, a Colby alum, who was working in student services at the University of Miami. And went down there and then decided to go into higher ed. So I have a master's degree in higher ed administration. So I was a resident. I knew that
about you.
Yes, I have an MED from the University of Maine.
Love that.
And I was a resident director, so a graduate assistant resident director. And so then when I went to Bowdoin, it was with an MED and training in higher ed. So I worked in Bowdoin for a couple of years before going off to law school.
Oh, wow. So my next question is, tell me a little bit about your legal background, and starting with maybe some of your co-ops, and what were some of your stepping stone roles to where you are now?
There's a lot in that one question. I'll get started and then redirect me if I go off course. So I went to law school thinking I wanted to go back into higher education. And at Northeastern, the co-op program, I'm such a huge fan of the co-op program at Northeastern. I remember on day one getting a presentation from the students just coming back from co-op, and I felt like I was standing with my eyes wide open, just thinking of all the exciting things I could do. At the time, I knew I wanted to live in Maine, and Northeastern didn't have a lot of Maine co-op employers. So I kind of just made my own co-ops. And my first co-op, I worked with a federal district judge in Bangor.
Oh, wow.
That was an interesting time. So it was my first co-op. It was in the summer and or the fall. I think it was the fall. At any rate, doesn't matter. I lived with my parents on the farm because it was an unpaid co-op. So I lived with my parents on the farm and helped my dad milk cows in the morning, and then would shower up, get dressed, drive an hour north to be in court at 8 a.m. So it was just a really cool first. I had a wonderful experience with my judge and a wonderful experience with my dad on the farm. It was a really cool time.
What a mix.
Yeah. And my second co-op was with a firm in Bangor, Redmond Winchell. And then my third co-op was with Bernstein Shur. And so by the time the summer was over of my third co-op, I had a job offer from Bernstein Shur, and I knew that I was going to be clerking for the Maine Supreme Court. So I decided to just do something fun with the the last co-op. And so I went to Anchorage, Alaska.
That was Alaska.
Yeah, that was the connection to Alaska. And I worked at a really small firm there and had a ball.
We love our Alaska connections. We still have about 80 alums who live in Alaska.
Oh,
and
yes.
You probably met the Jeffs when you were there, Jeff Feldman and Jeff Lowenfels, who were sort of the start of the Alaskan pipeline, a different pipeline that we call it for co-op students from Northeastern.
Well, here's a Northeastern connection. I did my co-op with Carol Mallory, who is one of the Northeastern law professors right now.
Wow.
We had different jobs, but we lived together and explored Alaska for 3 months together.
Well, I've
It was
only been
wonderful.
once for work, and it was phenomenal. Beautiful, beautiful country. And it was a great experience. And I actually was able to do an alumni event with the two Jeffs, and
Oh,
approximately
cool.
40 people came. They're a very tight knit group, so that's great. You
Yeah.
got to experience the little Alaska niche that we have.
Yeah.
Um, so, next question is, if you could go back in time to law school, what advice would you give yourself, and is there anything you think you might do differently?
Wow.
It sounds like it all worked out for you.
I would
but
say I don't think there's much I would do differently. I could not have loved Northeastern more. I was really fortunate. I was in a terrific class. I'm sure they're all terrific, but Carol and I were in the same class. My husband, Chet Randall, was in our class, and many of my best friends today were in that law school class, and it was just a diverse set of folks, and we just had a blast, and we worked hard in school, and we were outside as much as possible and built those lifelong friendships. I got really great training and great co-ops. I mean, truly, I don't think I would do
change it up.
anything differently at all. I loved it.
Ah, and you met your husband.
Yes.
I love the law love stories. So you may have noticed that I try to feature a couple every year on LinkedIn that met at law school, and there are many to choose from.
Yeah,
so that's
there are.
fantastic.
Yeah.
So next, I want to share with you some of the leadership characteristics that I think a leader should possess, and then I would love to hear what you think makes a great leader, and we'll see if they align. The first thing I think that's really critically important is that you be a good listener. The second is that you're pretty resilient. You're able to kind of go with the flow and, pivot, etc. I think you need to be a little bit of a risk taker, and in particular in the environments that we've seen in the last few years, trying things you're not good at, which, a lot of us, especially as adults, are more afraid to do that, but I think that's really important. I think a collaborative style is one that works best for all involved. I like an empathetic leader, and I think that's important. I feel like being able to uncover and also nurture the strengths of others is really key. And then I think throw in a dash of charisma. So a little bit charismatic really helps. So that's kind of my dream list, but I want to hear yours and see how they line up.
I was listening carefully, and I feel like you ticked off many of my top qualities that I think are really important in leadership. One that I talk about a lot, not just in leadership, but in people we hire, I think emotional intelligence is extraordinarily important. And when I think about hiring lawyers, nobody was talking about that 10 years ago, I don't feel like. But I think emotional intelligence is just a critical skill. And I always push back when people call it a soft skill. I don't even consider it a soft skill. I think it's so important.
How do you think you read that in an interview situation?
Well, we try to do behavioral interviewing. So we focus on, instead of asking people hypothetical questions or what's the books on your bedside table, that's not really that helpful. We tend to ask questions that ask the interviewee to report on their actual past behavior. Can you tell me about a situation in which you did X? Okay. And we've got tons of questions, so by category. So if we're looking for judgment or looking for leadership or looking for teamwork, and we've got lots of questions, but they're all designed to elicit how people actually reacted. And then I think you mentioned listening. Listening skills are so critical. I think lawyers like to talk, and I think it is so important to listen. And so I think by asking people about their own past experience and then listening to the answer. And you can hear as people talk about how they responded to situations, whether they seem to be able to read the room, or if sometimes people will describe a situation in which they clearly were picking up on unspoken communication, and they were able to discern that something more was going on and then deal with that. So, I think in an interview situation, we listen for it. I'm very attuned to it and listen for it. I think it's so important. So other skills, emotional intelligence, listening. I think authenticity is so critical. There's not enough of it, I think. And so when people are really authentic,
Right.
I find that people really respond to that. So I think that's really important.
I feel like I've had to get a little bit older to be able to do that better. Would you agree? Like I felt more comfortable the more experiences I've had to
Yeah.
just be me and lay it all out there.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. I do think that's true for me some, but I also think I was going to say another thing about a leader is this is a weird thing to say about myself, but I got feedback from one of my partners once about why I would be a good leader in the future. And he said, "You don't care if people like you." And I thought, that's so strange, such a strange thing to say. And then I thought, oh, I get what he's saying, and he's right. Of course, I try to be nice and kind, but I also try to lead by deciding what I think is best. And I like to listen to lots of perspectives and work collaboratively. But then I try to decide, I try to act on what I think is the right thing to do, not act on what I think will make me most popular or what will seem like the nice thing to do. I try to do what I think is right and best for the organization. And I think that takes a little bit of courage.
Yeah, you probably have a really strong center too. So you're a strong sense of self, and then usually that sort of lines you up with what your partner had said about you. So that's great to hear. Here's an interesting question for you, or I think it is. Do women lead differently than men? And what do you think makes them different?
Oh boy. I don't know that I have the answer, but I could chat about that topic for days. It just feels like there's a real awakening in women's leadership, is my sense. And I think, boy, it's so hard to generalize, especially.
I know. It is tough to generalize.
Yeah, and especially we try to be so sensitive around DEI issues and gender issues, and then to flip around and generalize in the other direction. Women are great for these reasons, but I do think if with that caveat, I'll generalize a little bit. I think some of the women leaders I know are very good listeners, and I think that helps a lot. I think they don't always have to be right. Mm-hmm. That helps a lot. I think they are quicker to collaborate. That's critical, in my view. I think many women leaders are more able to say, "I'm sorry," and apologize.
Not always true, like we're saying,
right,
but,
sure.
but in general, yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was wrong.
Right. I think it's some of those kind of human qualities, and it goes back to the stereotypical gender differences we learn as children, right? Women tend to be more relational and focus on people. And I will tell you that, to me, when I think about my job and all the various things that I do, I feel like the number one most important thing that I do is care for our people. If the people in your organization feel trusted and supported and valued, and they're given enough latitude to figure out how to do their jobs in the ways that they think are best, then I think you're going to get the best out of people, and they're going to give you way more than if you micromanage and try to tell them how they have to do it.
Absolutely agree. And a couple of little birdies at your firm told me that you're doing an amazing job. So that all sounds like you.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Here's kind of a tough question. Why do you think you're the first woman CEO at Bernstein Shur? What took this long?
I think that says more about the profession than my firm in particular, to be honest. When I think about the numbers of women in private practice and how many leave before they get to those senior spots, and some of the male, I was going to say some of the male leaders ahead of me, they're all male leaders ahead of me, but right. Not too many leaders. We used to be managing shareholders, then we switched to CEO a couple years ago. So I'll just call them CEO just to, but one was there for 20 years, and then the next one was there for 10 years, and the next one was there for 6 years. So when I think about the number of women who stayed long enough to be in a leadership role, there just aren't that many. And we had a leader who had been a leader for a long time, and so there wasn't kind of an opening, right. I think it's more that is my sense.
And do you feel an added weight and pressure because you're the first, or no?
I don't.
You
I've been
don't.
asked that before. I feel like I put the effort in to get the job. This might sound like a funny way to say it, but I really worked hard to get this job. But then once I got it, I think it then comes back to that centered place. I'm just really focusing on being the best leader that I can and doing my absolute best for this law firm and trusting that I'm giving it my all. And I mean, I certainly want to be successful, and I hope I'm not the last female leader of my firm, but I'm also not carrying the weight of all women thinking, gosh, I hope I don't fail because I'll make women look bad. I'm not carrying
Good.
that at all.
That's good to hear.
No.
So I'm asking you these questions in the middle of COVID-19 and a pandemic. You came on approximately a year ago, maybe a little bit longer. What's your day-to-day like, and what's it been like leading during COVID? What have you learned?
Oh gosh, so much. So I became the CEO on January 1, 2020, and then started watching the budding, it wasn't even a pandemic then, in February, and then we went remote like the world did March 13. So the bulk of my time has been during a pandemic. Also for 2020, I would say, we were just in crisis mode, and there was so much to do all the time. This might sound funny, but I was never scared or panicked or, oh my God, I'm going to crash the firm. It was kind of all hands on deck. The whole world was in this thing. I've got a really, really awesome board of directors. It's such a terrific group. And I have a female, the firm has a female CEO, COO, Julie Boehm, who's my right-hand person, and she is a whiz with the finances and the business operations of the firm. And so I had a really great team. Good. We worked together. I mean, everybody just united. And then I think what I brought to the mix was that human element. I just really, really connected with our people. I used to email the entire firm every single day from March until sometime in June, and then backed off a little bit. But I just really connected with people and asked them to stick with us and pull together, and tried to make sure we were supporting people in every conceivable way that we could. And, we made it. We actually, believe it or not, had a really strong fiscal year in the end. And,
Right.
And this year's a little bit odd for me because it's almost like I learned how to do this job in a crisis, and
Right.
even though we're still in a pandemic, it's backing off a little bit. And I found myself early in 2021 almost a little bit out of sorts. Like, okay, I'm not in a dead panic.
Right.
I know how to do that, and we're still in a pandemic, so I can't do the job I will in the future. And so I went through this little period of like, how do I do this job now?
Right.
I feel like I'm starting to get my feet under me, where we're still managing pandemics, still trying to take care of our people. We're still having people who are really, really struggling, particularly our working parents and
Yes.
working moms in particular. But I'm also trying to get us to do strategic planning and really thinking forward on business
Right.
development and some of the kind of more traditional things the CEO would think about. So I would say I'm somewhere in that transition period.
Yeah, it's almost like, who are we now if we're
Yes,
not in complete
yes.
and utter crisis?
Right,
but
right. The
yeah.
walls aren't burning down, but the fire's not totally out either.
And
Yeah.
do you do a lot of goal setting? Did you come into the role with goals set, like your own personal goals and then firm goals?
I did. When I started in January 2020, I did a couple things. I did a series of listening tours. So I met with every single shareholder, and then I met with groups of associates and staff. And, I tried to make sure I had a meeting with every human who works at Bernstein Shur, and got a lot of really good feedback. And then the other thing I did was I had a series of meetings just kind of setting out my vision in January. And then, of course, as we said, things kind of blew up a bit shortly thereafter. But it was interesting at the end of the year to look back. One of my goals was to grow top-line revenue, as you would imagine, and
yep.
we did that. Another thing I talked about was protecting our culture. I think our culture is stronger now than it's ever been. That going through a pandemic really bonded us together. And then this is just an odd example of a little thing I mentioned. It wasn't a major goal, but I mentioned mental health and well-being and how that's really something we need to pay attention to in this profession.
Right.
And then lo and behold, in the pandemic, we paid a lot of attention to mental health and
Oh,
well-being.
that's fantastic.
Speaking of which, next week is mental health, well-being in the law week. Did you know that?
Okay, no, I did not know that.
Yes,
I love to
so
hear that.
we'll be focusing on that all week next week.
It's very important. And we do address that in Women in the Law a lot, and sort of the
Yes, that's right.
mindfulness training and,
Right.
all kinds of things along those lines. But yeah, I do feel like women have really taken a fair amount of the brunt of the pandemic stress on.
Yes.
So it's important to really address that head on. All professions really, but it's important definitely in the legal field. We touched on this earlier, and I want to bring it up again because it's literally in your bio, and I know you care deeply about it, but diversity, equity, and inclusion. How are you addressing that in your leadership role, and what changes have you made since you've come on?
Well, you're right. So that's an issue I've cared about for a long, long time, and I'm a founding member of our DEI committee at the firm, and we've done a lot over time. Again, early in my tenure, our focus went to the pandemic until about May. And then I sent it was back when I was sending daily emails to the firm, and I sent an email entitled Racial Tensions, and I talked about George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. I talked about some of my observations. My husband and I live in Portland, and Portland is actually very diverse, has a very large immigrant population, and my kids are both athletes, so a lot of their friends are Black. And so I was able to share some of my observations of what I've seen just in our own little community. And so it was a pretty long email, and I shared a lot of reflections, and that the whole world was reacting to what was going on at the national level. And then we started some internal discussions, and then, I almost don't even know what to list. We've done a lot internally. One of my partners was instrumental in getting statewide leaders involved in, I don't know if you've heard of REI, it's the Racial Equity Institute out of South Carolina, I think. And they do 2-day trainings. It's called Phase 1 training on institutional racism. And so I had already done a 2-day training, and we have in the past brought REI into the firm to do training for the whole firm. But I then, this fall, went through a 2-day REI training with statewide leaders.
Oh, wow.
And then the Maine Community Foundation brought together, it was another group that brought together statewide leaders to do, it was probably about just under 20 hours of work, and that was called the Leadership Learning Exchange for Equity. And we looked at issues around race and leadership, racism, institutionalized racism, and leadership, and I participated in that. And lots and lots of people in my firm have been involved in different things like I have. We made a $10,000 donation to the Maine Justice Foundation, which created a racial justice fund.
I love that.
Yeah.
You're really putting your money where your mouth is.
Well,
and, leading by example is so critical. And I love that you opened up to your firm and just talked about your microcosm and your life and what you had seen. I think that's really brave.
Thanks.
We've gotten a lot of emails when some of these tragedies and horrible things have happened from our leadership at Northeastern, both our dean and our president. But I love that you were doing daily, sharing your thoughts daily. It's really being present.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that's part of that authenticity. I just really wanted people to know that I'm in the boat with them rowing.
Right.
We're all rowing together, and I'm right here in the boat with you.
Yeah, you're doing the hard work too.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you if you have role models who have you looked up to? And it could be in the firm, outside of the firm, it could be someone on a national scale, but are there leaders, both male and female, that have inspired you?
Yes. Well, so my female role models who I look to, most are, one is a former partner. Patricia Peard was my mentor for many, many years. She's retired now, but she was just amazing. She was a real trailblazer in the fight for gay rights and same-sex marriage in Maine, and she's been amazing, and both helped train me as a lawyer and was a mentor as a leader. My mother has been a big role model of mine always, so she's someone I look up to. And then I'm glad you said female
Sure.
or male. Charlie Miller is a former CEO of our firm, and he has just been a huge champion of mine. And when I first took on the recruiting role in our firm, he just brought me in. He was a CEO, and I felt like I was kind of, right at his side. I was on the board of directors, and I was in charge of hiring lawyers, and he just included me in so many different parts of the operation of the firm, and used to publicly say I was the future leader of the firm before I was even ready to hear it. And I used to say, that's so embarrassing, Charlie. But, he saw this in me before I did. So when I think about mentors and role models, he is one as well.
He's one. Wow, that's great to hear. I wanted to ask you specifically a little bit about negotiating skills. How have you learned those? How are you honing those in your current role? Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yes, it's funny. So I grew up as a municipal lawyer, and even though I did negotiating, I don't think, when I think of lawyers negotiating, I have partners I think of as like terrific negotiators, and I don't have myself in that category. When I think about negotiation, my brain goes to the lawyer recruiting function that I had. And then you've probably read the book Women Don't Ask. I was a moderator of a program we did for women on that book, and we had about 150 people and talked about women not negotiating for themselves. So when I think about negotiating, I think about both the importance of women negotiating for themselves.
Absolutely.
And the position I took as a recruiting person in a firm was the importance of not putting women in a position that they must negotiate for themselves, because we know that most don't. Right. So I very openly took the position when we were hiring someone. I thought it was important that we try to figure out what is the appropriate salary for that job and offer that. Wow. And not expect people to negotiate up, because typically men do, women don't.
Right.
So that's where my brain goes for negotiating.
Oh, I like that. And I love that you all put thought into that, and almost put women in the position to succeed and not have
Right.
to do the things that they don't feel the most comfortable with. Some women do, but not all, and many don't. So that's great to hear.
Right. And as what that book talks about is, I just have to, just so I don't leave anyone with the wrong impression, women are great at negotiating for others, not always great at negotiating for themselves. And that, honestly, when I think about when I've been my fiercest, it's been negotiating for other people. It's like the mama bear comes out in me, and I, if I feel like there's justice involved, especially, but it's easier to negotiate for others than myself, although I certainly learned to negotiate for myself as well.
Yeah, women are great at being a champion for other people, not just women, but men, women, their children, dogs, cats, whoever it might be.
So true.
It could be illness, it could be career success, it could be all of those things, but we're not great about self-advocating. This is a question I always hesitate to ask a little bit, because I don't love when women's conferences and programming dive fully into work-life balance, but I do want to ask, I know that you do unplug occasionally and talk about the importance of giving yourself a complete break from work and what you do at work periodically in order to come back better and more capable?
Well, I will tell you the advice I've been sharing freely with my firm, because right now the world is having a hard time unplugging. People who are
Agree.
working remotely are really struggling with letting go and unplugging. And I'm actually pretty good at it, I will tell you. I mentioned my mentor, Pat Peard. She told me as a very young associate, she told me that I should go on a 2-week vacation every summer. And she said, don't ask permission. Just do it. Just announce it and go, and nobody will ever say a word, and you should do it. And so my entire career, I've had 2-week vacation every summer, and then I take 2 other weeks spread out. So I've taken 4 weeks for a long time. In the early days of going on vacation, I'd go to Alaska. We had a rural cabin in remote Alaska, and I had no cell service back then. So I would have to tell all my clients I can't be reached. And the really good thing about that was in my formative years as a lawyer. So I got used to turning my matters over to my trusted colleagues and letting my clients know I wasn't available. And that tends to be how I go on vacation. Now, of course, I'll check email, or I try to make sure that I am reachable if someone needs me, especially now as I'm leading the firm. But I'm pretty good at unplugging, and I think it is critical. And I worry about people who don't, because our brains need a break. We're bombarded so constantly. Just while I was talking to you, I have all my phones silenced, and my Apple Watch was just ringing. It's like, it's so hard to just turn everything off. And we have things coming at us all the time. And what I've been saying to my firm is, if we want to serve our clients well, and be whole for our families and for ourselves, it is critical to unplug and unwind. And I've really been trying to push people to take every single minute of their vacation time.
I find it takes me the first week to unwind, and then the second week I can actually enjoy myself.
That's exactly right.
It literally takes me that first week to decompress.
I agree. That's why the 2 weeks together are critical, I think. Yeah, I agree.
And doesn't Europe take 6 weeks?
Yes.
Why are we not there?
Right. But that's our goal. That's our
Note
goal.
to self. Thank you for that. I think it's important, and we were discussing mental health earlier, and so I think that is part of mental health, is learning to let go.
Yeah.
Let go. We're not all powerful.
Look, I've been working long enough. I have seen marriages dissolve. I've seen people have mental health crises. Lawyers have a high incidence of substance abuse, right? Those are all things, you just have to take a break. You have to take care of yourself. It's critical.
Right. So if you were speaking to someone, it could be a man or a woman, in a new leadership role, what advice would you have for them?
Oh, gosh. Of course, it's going to depend what industry and all that. So I'll assume lawyers for a second. And the first thing I'm going to say is advice that Charlie Miller gave me. So early on, I grew up on a farm. I was a municipal lawyer, and I wasn't that kind of hardcore business transactional lawyer. And I said, how am I going to run a multi-million-dollar business? This is earlier on. And he said, Joan, we can hire people to do the finances. We cannot hire people to lead. And so I would say to a new leader, focus on being the leader that you would want. Focus on your people. Trust them, empower them, and help lift them up so that they can bring their best selves to work, and they will give their best selves to your organization.
Oh, I love that. What about, do you think leadership traits can be taught, or is it innate?
It's probably some of both. I think there are natural leaders for sure, just like charisma. I don't think you can teach charisma. You can teach, some of the niceties and some little tricks. So there's definitely something to natural leadership. But I also think there's value in trying to learn how to be a good leader. So I'll give you an example. As I was thinking about coming into this role, I really made a point to put myself in training positions to learn how to run a law firm, to learn how to lead leaders and how to lead professionals, which is hard.
Right.
And I tried to learn about different leadership styles. And it's valuable to know that there are different styles and to know where your strengths are and maybe where your teammates might have strengths that can supplement yours.
Right.
If you don't learn about that, you might have an asset on your team that you don't recognize. Another thing that's become important to me is I started to learn about servant leadership and compassionate leadership, and those felt like revelations to me. They both resonated with my heart and my soul because I feel like that's how I lead. Right. And yet I didn't even know that was a leadership style. I'd been to lots of leadership trainings for lawyers and nobody ever talked about compassionate leadership. So I'm grateful that I was trying to learn how to be a good leader and discovered that. So,
Right.
There's natural leadership tendencies, but I think there's no substitute for really putting the effort in to try to learn how to be the best leader that you can be.
Wonderful. One of the tenets of women in the law and our programming is that women are uplifting and supporting other women. What have you seen in your career that relates to that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's so important. First of all, I feel so grateful for the women who went before us, right? When I think about the earlier generation and the fact that I'm able to lead this firm and that I'm able to bring my authentic self to work has a lot to do with the women who opened the doors for us. And I think it's important to continue to do that for the next generations and sideways. I have a group of women leaders here at the firm who are incredibly supportive of each other. They're all in different practice areas and they lead in different ways. They're not all the same,
Right.
but incredibly supportive. And they're all mothers, and many of them are teaching third grade math at home while they're trying to run a practice and I just think it's that kind of support is kind of life-saving. Again, going back to how few women stick with a private practice of law and stay to the end of their career.
Right.
The numbers are
go in-house.
The numbers are still bad.
Right.
So I think those of us who are here, we really owe it to each other and to the next generation to do everything we can to support each other and lift each other up.
That's great to hear. What else do you want to accomplish both professionally and personally? Where do you, where do you see yourself in 5 and 10 years? Do you still see yourself as CEO? Do you have a time frame in mind?
I feel too new to announce my time frame.
Yeah.
But I really, Charlie Miller, I talk about Charlie a lot. Charlie used to talk about where there's stewards in each generation. I very much feel like a steward of this law firm. I've loved this law firm literally since my first interview. And I think it's a wonderful law firm, but I just want to do everything in my power to make it stronger, better, more supportive, more diverse, and more profitable. I would like us to grow organically. I'm not looking to go, acquire another law firm or anything like that, but I think we're a very desirable place to work right now. I want that to continue to grow. I want people to want to work here. I want clients to want to be represented by my colleagues, and I hope to be able to grow the firm significantly and at the same time to have it be an environment that nourishes our people.
I love that. I've read a lot about transformational leaders versus transactional leaders, and it sounds like you're transformational, and I love the servant leader concept that describes you very aptly.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
I didn't answer the what's next, so I don't have a timeline, but I can tell you that my husband is very eager for the next chapter, whenever that comes. I think it is going to involve an enormous amount of outdoor time.
Okay.
And he is trying to convince me that we should buy one of those big fancy
RVs?
Yeah, not an RV. It's more like a van that you can sleep in and drive around, but it's not an RV. It's a van.
Okay.
So
It sounds fun.
I'm not entirely won over yet, but I do think between our cabin in Alaska and then being on the road, I think there's going to be a lot of hiking and mountain biking and kayaking in our future, God willing, and health
Right.
prevailing.
Was the Alaska cabin from your time there? Or no?
No,
There are other
no.
Alaska
Look,
connections.
So I was there for co-op, then came here, and Chet and I actually started dating once I lived in Maine and he lived in Alaska. So
Oh,
I
gosh.
moved to Alaska early in my career. I left Bernstein Shur and moved out there and
Okay.
lived there for a year. And when we came back, one of the ways that I just felt so guilty pulling him away from Alaska that I softened
Softened
was
it
my
with a
guilt.
cabin?
Yeah.
Okay.
We bought a cabin with 2 law school friends who
Okay.
are both in our law school class as well.
Oh, I love your class.
Yeah,
That's
it was a pretty
fantastic.
great class.
It is.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about leadership that you would want our listeners or viewers to know that you feel is compelling?
Well, I guess what I most want, and this is what I think about a lot, is when I think about the difficulty we're going through around the world in so many ways right now, it didn't have to. So, boy, it's a longer answer. I'll just say some of what we've gone through, it didn't have to go that way. And I just feel like the more diverse leaders we can get, male, female, racial diversity, gender, sexual orientation, and when I really focus on gender, it's important to me that people don't hear that as anti-male. We need white male leaders too, right? We just need a mix of everybody. We need all hands on deck in a collaborative, open, compassionate way. We need people to lead in that way to move the ball forward. We've not to go too far afield, but we've got to save this planet.
Right.
We've got to take better care of our people. And I think we need all hands on deck as soon as possible.
Absolutely. We've made a few strides in recent months, but we've got a long, long ways to go. And
Yes.
that's
Yes.
absolutely correct. Well, Joan, I am so appreciative that you ignored your Apple Watch and your probably double phones and your assistant pulling on you for the last 45 minutes or so. I'm really grateful for your time and for you sharing your thoughts about leadership and what you've learned so far and what you hope to accomplish and what you've already accomplished so far. So I'm grateful for your time today, and I loved listening to your thoughts on leadership and the fact that you would take time to share them.
Oh, Mielle, thank you so much for having me. I always love talking with you. You do a wonderful job with the Women in Law Conference. I love that conference. And thanks for having me. I'm really honored that you had me on today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for making time for us.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it.